Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The evening sky hung heavy with clouds, casting long shadows across the driveway as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wedding invitation that I hadn't been asked to help design. Claire, my wife of 10 years, had placed it neatly beside my cup of coffee that morning. It should have been a proud moment, seeing Ellen's name in elegant calligraphy alongside her fiancé's. Instead, my eyes narrowed on the names listed at the top: Claire, Ellen's father, and nothing. My name was missing. Brian, Claire's voice broke through my thoughts as she walked into the room, her tone light, as if she hadn't noticed the glaring omission that burned in front of me. Did you see the invitation? It came out beautifully, don't you think? Yeah, beautiful, I replied, my voice tight. I slid the invitation toward her, tapping the top. But I think they left out something important. She glanced down, following my finger to where her ex-husband's name stood proudly in black ink. She frowned slightly, as though the oversight was a mere inconvenience, not the slap in the face that it felt like to me. Oh, that, Claire waved a dismissive hand. It's just tradition, Brian. You know how these things go. He's her biological father. I clenched my jaw, biting back the bitter response that sat on the edge of my tongue. Biological father. The man who showed up once in a blue moon, long enough for Ellen to shower him with undeserved praise before he disappeared again. Meanwhile, I had been the one raising her, paying for her education, buying her a car, and supporting her dreams. And this was the thanks I got, erased from her life's most important day. Right, I said, standing up from the table, my hands resting on the back of the chair. And I'm just the guy who foots the bill, right? Claire blinked, as though confused by my sudden shift in tone. Brian, don't be dramatic. You know she loves you. This is just a formality. A formality. The word echoed in my mind, solidifying the gnawing feeling that had been growing inside me for months. I wasn't part of this family in the way I had imagined. I was a convenience, a financial safety net, but not someone to be acknowledged when it mattered most. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked over to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and twisted off the cap, letting the cool bitterness slide down my throat. Claire watched me, her brow furrowed, but said nothing more. In her mind, the issue was already solved. But it wasn't solved, it was just the beginning. Later that afternoon, I made a few calls, checking in with the friends I had invited to the wedding. One by one, they gave me the same answer. They hadn't received any invitations. My stomach churned with each confirmation, a dull rage building as the realization set in. I wasn't just being sidelined. I had been entirely left out. That evening, after Claire had gone to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table once again. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old floorboards. In the dim light, I opened my laptop and reviewed the payments I had made for Ellen's wedding. It was all there. Deposits for the venue, the florist, the caterer, and more. Tens of thousands of dollars, all paid without hesitation because I believed I was doing the right thing. But now it all felt like a betrayal. As I closed the laptop, the anger simmered just beneath the surface, but I kept it in check. The restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation, the soft clinking of silverware adding to the hum of activity around us. I sat at the end of a long table, watching Ellen as she laughed with her fiancé, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. Tonight was supposed to be a celebratory dinner with the future in-laws, a chance for both families to connect before the wedding. But for me, it felt like a performance, one I was barely keeping up with. Claire sat next to me, beaming as she discussed the latest wedding details with Ellen's soon-to-be mother-in-law. I caught bits and pieces of the conversation. Floral arrangements, catering options, all the usual. But my mind was elsewhere, stuck on the fact that not only had my name been left off the invitation, but none of my guests had even been invited. I was a ghost at my own family celebration. Brian, Claire said, nudging me with her elbow. You've been quiet all night. Everything okay? I forced a smile, nodding, just taking it all in. It wasn't a complete lie. I was taking in every detail, every reminder that I was on the outskirts of this event. But that fake smile quickly faded when Ellen tapped her glass with a fork, rising to her feet. "Everyone, can I have your attention?" she announced, her voice bright and cheerful. The table fell silent as she stood with her fiancé, a proud smile on her face. "I just wanted to say thank you all for being here tonight," she continued. "This wedding wouldn't be happening without the love and support of both our families, and I have a special announcement to make." I leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. Whatever she was about to say, I had a feeling it wouldn't sit well. "As you all know," Ellen said, glancing at her fiancé, then back at the group, "it's always been my dream to have my dad walk me down the aisle, and I'm so happy to say that he's agreed." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at Ellen, my mind reeling. Her dad? The same man who barely showed up in her life? The man who couldn't be bothered to help with any of her education or life expenses. And yet, he would get the honor of walking her down the aisle. Claire shifted beside me, clearly sensing my anger, but she said nothing. It was Ellen's moment after all. No one wanted to ruin it. No one but me. I stood up, raising my glass. "I'd like to make a toast." The room quieted, all eyes turning toward me. I could feel the tension building as everyone waited for what they assumed would be a heartfelt gesture. I took a slow breath, letting the words form carefully on my tongue. "It's been my pleasure to be part of this family for the past 10 years. I began, my voice steady, though each word felt sharp as a blade. I've seen Ellen grow into a remarkable young woman, and I've supported her every step of the way, financially, emotionally, in every way I could." Ellen smiled, clearly oblivious to where I was going with this, but Claire's face paled as she caught the edge in my tone. "And now," I continued, "I realized something important. I've been more of an ATM than a stepfather." The smiles at the table faded, replaced by stunned silence. Ellen's eyes widened as she looked between me and her mother. "So, since your real dad is walking you down the aisle," I said, setting my glass down on the table, "I think it's only fair that your real dad pays for this wedding too. Cheers to the happy couple." I downed my drink, feeling the cold liquid burn down my throat, and turned toward the exit, leaving behind a room full of shocked faces. As I walked out into the night, the weight of 10 years of thankless contributions lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. The quiet of the house was unsettling as I walked through the front door. The usual warmth of home felt distant, almost foreign now. I headed straight for my office, shutting the door behind me. The weight of what I'd done at dinner sank in, but with it came a strange sense of satisfaction. They deserved every word I'd said. I poured myself a drink, savoring the bite of the whiskey as it hit my throat. For a moment, I let myself enjoy the silence, knowing full well it wouldn't last. Sure enough, the front door slammed, and I could hear Claire's hurried footsteps approaching. The door to my office flew open, and there she stood, her face flushed with anger. "Brian, what the hell was that?" she demanded, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. I leaned back in my chair, taking another sip before answering. That was me finally saying what I've been holding in for years. I'm done being treated like an outsider in my own family. Claire's eyes narrowed, disbelief etched across her face. "You humiliated Ellen in front of everyone. This was supposed to be a celebration, and you turned it into..." "A reality check," I interrupted, setting my glass down with a hard clink. "I've been supporting her, paying for everything, for years, and what do I get in return? Not a single guest of mine is invited to the wedding. Her real dad gets all the glory, and I'm just the guy who writes the checks. I'm done, Claire." "You knew this was important to her." Claire shot back, her voice rising. Her father, I spat, standing up, was never around. He didn't pay for her education, didn't buy her that car, didn't keep a roof over her head. But now he gets the privilege of walking her down the aisle, and I'm supposed to just sit there, watching from the sidelines? Claire's expression softened for a moment, but only briefly. "Brian, this is about Ellen, not you." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Exactly. It's always about Ellen. And I've been nothing more than a bank account for the both of you." The room fell silent, the tension thick between us. I could see her searching for something, anything to say, but nothing would change how I felt. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I paused, the gravity of my next words sinking in. "I've already started making calls. I'm canceling all the payments. I'm not paying for this wedding anymore." Claire's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," I replied, crossing the room to face her. "I've poured enough money into a wedding I'm barely even invited to. Let her real dad take care of it." Her face paled, and she stepped back, shaking her head in disbelief. "Brian, this is going to destroy everything." I met her gaze, unflinching. Maybe it's time for things to be destroyed. Without waiting for her response, I walked out of the office and headed upstairs, leaving her standing in stunned silence. Tomorrow, I would make sure every vendor knew the wedding wasn't my responsibility anymore. The morning after the dinner fallout, the house was unusually still, as if it too were holding its breath. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. My mind was clear for the first time in months. The calls to the vendors had been made, and the weight of my decision sat heavily in the air. Yet, I felt no regret. Claire emerged from the bedroom, her face tired and drawn. She glanced at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, she just stood there as if contemplating what to say, then finally walked over and sat down across from me. Her eyes searched mine, but I wasn't going to be the one to break the silence. "Brian," she started, her voice softer than I'd expected. "Can we talk about this? About last night?" I raised an eyebrow but didn't respond right away, taking another sip of my coffee instead. Claire sighed, frustration flickering across her face. "Look, I know things got out of hand," she continued, "but this isn't the way to fix it. Canceling the payments. Brian, the wedding is in a few weeks. What are we supposed to do?" I set my cup down and leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Claire, I'm not backing down from this. I've been nothing but a wallet for Ellen. I've given her everything, and this is how she repays me? By cutting out my guests, by pushing me aside for a man who's done nothing." Claire shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "She's scared Brian. She wants her father to be part of her life again. That doesn't mean she doesn't care about you." "She doesn't care, Claire. Not in the way that matters." I leaned forward, my voice firm but steady. "I've been more than just a stepdad to her. I've been her father. But that means nothing to her, not when her real dad shows up. I'm not willing to play second fiddle anymore." Her lip trembled, and she looked down at the table, gripping her hands tightly together. "I didn't know she'd exclude your guests. I didn't realize how much this would hurt you." "Well, now you do," I said, standing up. "And I'm done pretending this is okay." Claire's gaze shot up to meet mine, panic flashing in her eyes. "Brian, please, don't walk away from this. From us." I paused, my hand resting on the back of the chair. "You walked away from me a long time ago, Claire. You and Ellen both." She reached out, her voice breaking. "We can fix this. I can talk to her. We can find a way." "No, Claire," I interrupted, my voice firm. "I'm not paying for a wedding where I'm not even wanted. You'll need to figure it out with Ellen and her real father." The finality of my words seemed to sink in as she slumped back in her chair. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Claire to sit in the wake of my decision. There would be no turning back now. The house felt different now. Empty, but not in a way that saddened me. It was quiet, peaceful even. Claire and Ellen had left 2 days ago. They packed their things in a rush, the tension between us too thick to cut through. I had expected some sort of last-ditch attempt from Claire to fix things, but she had simply gathered her belongings and left. The locks had been changed soon after. Now it was just me, and for the first time in years I wasn't bothered by that. I stood in the living room, taking in the familiar yet transformed space. Claire's decorative touches were gone. No more pastel cushions or framed photos of Ellen's milestones. I removed them all, boxing them up and setting them aside. There was no bitterness in the act, only a quiet sense of closure. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I walked over, glancing at the caller ID. It was Greg, my closest friend. "Brian," Greg's deep voice greeted me when I answered. "I've been thinking about you, man. How are you holding up?" I let out a small laugh. "Better than I thought I'd be, honestly." "I bet. Claire and Ellen finally out?" "Yeah, moved out on Monday." There was a pause on the other end before Greg spoke again. "You really went through with it, huh? Canceling everything?" "Every last payment," I said, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. I wasn't about to fund a wedding where I wasn't respected, let alone invited in spirit. Greg chuckled. "I've got to say, Brian, that toast of yours, legendary. I heard about it from Mike. He said the room was dead silent." "Yeah, it wasn't my finest moment," I admitted, though there was a part of me that relished the memory. But it needed to be said. I'm done being taken for granted. "You did the right thing," Greg assured me. "You've been too good to them for too long. It's time you started thinking about yourself." "Exactly," I replied. "In fact, I'm thinking of taking a trip. A fresh start, you know? Get out of town for a bit, clear my head." "A trip, huh? Where to?" "Not sure yet," I said, glancing out the window at the autumn leaves swirling in the breeze. "But somewhere far from here. I think I need a new perspective." "Well, wherever you go, just make sure to send me a postcard," Greg teased. "And Brian, don't look back. You deserve better." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, Greg, I think I finally understand that." Claire and Ellen were a chapter that had closed, and now, for the first time in years, I was free to write my own story.